It was a calm Saturday morning on December 10, 2005. The sky was clear and the air was still as passengers made their way to the airport, unaware that they were about to board a flight that would be remembered for the wrong reasons.
To Sosoliso Airlines Flight 1145 crashed. The majority of those on board were children aged between 12 to 16-year-old.
To Sosoliso Airlines Flight 1145 was a short-haul journey expected to last just over an hour. On board were 103 passengers and 7 crew members. Among them was Pastor Bimbo Odukoya, a beloved preacher whose sermon had touched millions.
You can never experience romance until you experience God. Don't you tell me you can't live in holiness. You are a saint, not a sinner. Know who you are.
There were notable entrepreneurs, young professionals, and families simply heading home for the weekend. Also, over half of the passengers on board were 60 children from Loyola Jesuit College, excited to reunite with their loved ones for the Christmas holidays. Each person carried dreams, expectations, and plans, oblivious to the fact that in just over an hour, their fates will take a devastating turn, and out of 110 people on board, only 2 would live to see Christmas.
And then there was like this scream from the back of the plane. It was a woman. She screamed, and at that point, that was just like all that was needed for the chaos to just kind of like erupt.
To Sosoliso Airlines Flight 1145 was a domestic flight scheduled for 12:25 p.m. in Abuja to 2:08 p.m. Port Harcourt, West African time. The airplane that was used for the flight was a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 and it was manufactured in 1972. It became registered in Nigeria in June 2003. It was owned by JAT Airways and operated by To Sosoliso Airlines Limited. The aircraft was described as airworthy as at the time of takeoff. Flight 115 was carrying 103 passengers and 7 crew members. The majority of those on board were 60 school students from Loyola Jesuit College in Abuja. They were mostly between ages 12 to 16 and were traveling home for their Christmas holiday.
It was December 10th, 2005. I was 16 years old and I was a high school student. I was in my senior year of high school.
Initially, Loyola Jesuit College students from Port Harcourt mostly traveled between Abuja and Port Harcourt by road. However, due to the increased kidnapping rate along the roads during the 1990s, parents became scared and decided that road travel was too dangerous for their children. And so in 2001, To Sosoliso Airlines started operations. It provided a convenient travel operation between Port Harcourt and Abuja in Nigeria. This option was a saving grace for many parents of Loyola Jesuit College, as parents regularly booked their kids on these flights. Also on the flight was Pastor Bimbo Odukoya, a well-known Nigerian tele-evangelist and pastor of the Fountain of Life Church.
If I treat you more important than me, and you treat me more important than you, then we are both important. What is love? Mental madness. What is love? Love is a feeling that you feel when you have a feeling you haven't felt before. If you feel that you want to always look elegant, wear heels. Heels is about elegance. Praise the Lord. If you don't know how to walk, I'll teach you how to walk. You can never experience romance until you experience God. Don't you tell me you can't live in holiness. You are a saint, not a sinner. Know who you are.
Also, the national president of the Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Mr. Uche Marcos Okoro, who was returning from a union meeting, was also on the passenger list. So what exactly happened to To Sosoliso Airlines Flight 115? Flight 115 had 2 pilots, Captain Benjamin Adebayo, a 48-year-old Nigerian with a total flying experience of 10,050 hours, with 1,900 of them on the Douglas DC-9. The co-pilot was Gerald Andan, a 33-year-old Ghanaian with a total flying experience of 920 hours, with 670 of them on the Douglas DC-9. Flight 115 departed from Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport at 12:25 p.m. with 103 passengers and 7 crew members. The flight was uneventful until its final approach in Port Harcourt. At about 140 kilometers from the airport, the aircraft contacted controller for initial descent clearance and was cleared by controller to descend to 16,000 feet. The aircraft continued its descent until 1 p.m. when the crew asked the controller for the weather condition at the airport. The controller told the pilot that there was large thunder and rainstorm in the area. The pilots acknowledged the report and continued their descent. And that was when they encountered heavy rain, poor visibility and cloud cover. This was a critical factor that led to the crash, as it was hard for the pilots to see the runway. Also, the fact that the airport lacked the necessary instrument landing system for safer landings in such condition. At 11 kilometers from the airport, as at 1:04 p.m., the aircraft had entered adverse weather condition. The pilot then requested clearance to land at runway 21. The controller then contacted flight 1145 and advised that there was a possibility of heavy downpour in the airport, but warned the pilot that the runway could be slightly wet, indicating that hydroplaning was a possibility. Flight 1145 then descended until it had passed the decision altitude of 307 feet. As the rain intensified, the visibility deteriorated. The unlit runway further aggravated the situation. Unable to make out the unlit runway through the rain, Captain Adebayo called for a go-around at an altitude of about 200 feet above the ground. His decision, however, was too late, as flight 1145 was already way below decision altitude. The too low gear warning then sounded. Sadly, they had not prepared the aircraft's configuration in a timely manner, and the aircraft kept descending.
And I just remember like the rising tension in the cabin. No one was saying anything, no one was screaming or anything like that, but like it was palpable, just the feeling in the air that we're all thinking like, what the heck is going on?
The DC-9 then slammed into the grass strip between the runway and the taxiway. It then slid and struck a concrete drainage culvert located near the runway. The collision then disintegrated the aircraft. The tail section was immediately destroyed and the engine was lodged into the drainage. As it shattered, fuel spilled and the aircraft went up in flames.
And I remember holding my friend's hand. That was the last thing I remember doing. She was in the aisle seat next to mine. And that was like the last thing I did. The last person I looked at, spoke to on that plane. And then it was just darkness. I assume at that point that's when the plane actually crashed.
As at the time, Port Harcourt Airport had one fire truck and no ambulances. None of the 7 crew members survived the crash. Out of the 60 school children from Loyola Jesuit College, 59 passed on, with Kechi Okwuchi being the only survivor from her school.
And it was just darkness until I was opening my eyes and I was in a hospital bed in South Africa, and 5 weeks had passed and I was waking up from a coma.
The other survivor was Bumi Amuson, who was Pastor Bimbo's assistant. In response to the crash, the then Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo vowed to overhaul the country's aviation sector. A crisis meeting was later called, and some of the senior air officials were suspended from their jobs. After the crash, Loyola Jesuit College created a students' club to discuss and reflect on the issues within Nigeria. Also, the school founded the Jesuit Memorial College in 2013 and Loyola Academy in 2014, which focuses on providing affordable education to lower-income families. The Nigerian Accident Investigation Bureau recommended that wind shear recognition and recovery should be made compulsory into pilots' initial and recurrent simulator training. This was not applied immediately, and that resulted in another airline's crash a year later in Abuja, which was caused by wind shear. The Nigerian Accident Investigation Bureau concluded that the probable cause of the crash was due to the adverse weather condition and also the pilot's decision to continue the approach beyond the decision altitude without having the runway in clear sight. In January 2009, Harold Demuri, the then Director General of the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, said that the families of the air crash victims will be compensated because Sosoliso had also paid $2.3 million into an escrow account to compensate the families. I know the pain and grief of losing loved ones in such a tragic and sudden manner can never be lessened by any form of compensation. However, it is my hope that each family received the compensation they rightfully deserved.